Hello, David Clarke here from DVC Training again. In this second video on the Batserver, I'm going to have a look at some of the other functions that you do get when you install it. In other videos, I might be going into how to create your own batch files, but for now, just looking at the first beta version that we've got here. Couple of provisos before I do. Firstly, just to remind you that Batserver is not written by Grass Valley. It's actually written by somebody called Mick, who works for EDIUS.net. And he's taken what Grass Valley have put into EDIUS 11, which is the Chorus Hub, and then he's used it to add this functionality to it. But as it's such, it's not an official part of the program. So bear that in mind. It's a freebie made by somebody else using something that's in there. Mick's very clever. You might have even spoke to him because he does a lot of tech support for EDIUS.net and Grass Valley. But just bear that in mind. It's not part of EDIUS. It's written by somebody else. Secondly, it also sends out calls to other free programs, FFmpeg and so on, and things like that change all the time. Second thing is these videos are being done with the beta version, and it will be developed more as time goes by. If you're actually watching these videos a few months after I actually made them, things might have changed. Finally, I did notice in my first video I made a silly mistake, which is I said if you go up to this create new EDIUS menu entry thing here and you click on it, if you select that you can create something from scratch. You can't. That's just a header. It does nothing. You create stuff by doing these things here or writing your own batch files. Right, having said that, now I want to look a bit more into some of these different options that we have got inside of Batserver. So, for example, I'm often asked, is there a way from EDIUS that I can just click on something and get it to open up that file in a particular program? Well, now there is through Batserver. I have Affinity Photo on this system, which I do use in preference to Photoshop, primarily because you only do a one-off payment for it. You don't have to pay for it every single month, and it does everything that I want. So I want to set up something which will send a still image from EDIUS straight to Affinity. So I'm going to come up to create new EDIUS entry and say open with from the bin. So what kind of thing? If you say default, it will open anything. I just want to do stills. I don't want to do audio video. So I'm just going to go stills. And that means that this option will only appear on any stills in the bin. Then I'm going to go OK. And the next thing it's going to say, what program do you want to open up? So I am going to go to the C drive, program files, Affinity Photo, find the Affinity Photo executable and choose it. Do you want it in the bin or the timeline? Let's say the bin. Open with, and I'm going to call this open with Affinity Photo. Clonk. So I've now created the option to open still images with Affinity Photo. Pop back into the bin here and, well, I haven't got a still image, so let me just take one. There we are. Now, if I right click on that, I have now got the option to open it with Affinity Photo. If I right click on a piece of video, it's not there. That option isn't there. That's because I told it that this is a thing for only for still images. So right click, open in Affinity Photo, and wait a second, Affinity Photo pops up. That's it. That has taken the still, put it into Affinity. Obviously I can do Affinity stuff and save it. If I just save it over the top, that will automatically be updated in the bin. If I just blah, 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 save it, go back to EDIUS, there's my still image and with all those changes on it, and I could obviously just right click, go back to Affinity, blah, blah, blah. But that's great. For ages people have asked me, how can you get it to open with a specific program? Well, now you can set up several different options. I could have different ones for video, different ones for this, different ones for that. Great, very simple little option. What else? Another thing that I do use is this one here, Deinterlace, to create a high quality deinterlaced version of your video. This is something which is only useful if you've got interlaced video in the first place. Interlace is how we used to do video all the time. These days with MP4 files and everything else, we're doing progressive all the time. But if you're using old-fashioned stuff and you want to make an MP4 out of it, you really need to deinterlace it. And EDIUS does it, but it doesn't do a brilliant job. So if I bring in a clip here, which I did use on a tutorial all about deinterlacing, this clip's from some old i8 footage. If I just pop it up full screen, you can see a lot of the problems here. So it's hi8, so obviously it's a bit fuzzy, but it's got all these horrible jaggies on it, and it didn't look like that in the first place. That's because an interlace clip is made up of two half frames. So it's 50 frames interlace, which means that half the frame updates every 50th of a second. And it's every other line that updates every 50th of a second. What EDIUS does, if you're on a 25 frames a second progressive timeline, what it'll do is basically dump one of those fields completely. That means you end up with something that's only half the horizontal resolution that it used to, and you get these horrible jaggies. And you can fiddle with it a bit by trying out the different field options and the optical flow and so on, but it's not that brilliant. I did do a video all about how I take clips out of EDIUS into another program, and I deinterlace it all in another program. Because of the Batserver, I can do it straight off the timeline. I can't use the method I explained in my other video, which is called QTMGC, because they haven't written that in with the batch files, so maybe I'll work out how to do that and write it in myself. But right now we have other methods, which are actually very good. So I'm just going to go up here, say create a deinterlace video, and these are the different options that we have. Before I had this QTMGC, YADIF was my favorite. YADIF actually stands for yet another deinterlacing filter, and you can see you've got two variations here, YADIF with MoComp or motion compensation, and YADIF half frame. And a little explanation up here of what that means. So MoComp, that gives you really good quality deinterlation. So it uses the YADIF and does a bit of motion compensation as well. That is actually a very good option, but it's a little bit slow. The high-speed one is faster, but not quite as good quality. Now, obviously, the simplest thing for your own footage is to pop these in, try them on a couple of clips and see what you think, see how good you like it. But I'm going to choose this one. You might also notice if you read this thing up here, it says all these different options are making 50p footage, apart from this one. And of course, when you're deinterlacing, you're starting with 50 half frames a second. And it's 25 full frames a second, but they're split up into 50 half frames. So do you save that as 25 full frames a second, or do you save that as 50 full frames a second? And obviously there are two options and they're both valid. So what you have here is these, do it as 50p, this one does it as 25. So I'm going to add in that. The next question is, what kind of file do you want to make with it? So there's MPEG-4, MPEG-2 and ProRes. I would always go for ProRes because I would actually deinterlace my clips and then use them on the timeline, and I'd want to edit with them. So if you're going to reuse this stuff, you want a format which doesn't really mangle them very much, doesn't compress them very much. MPEG-4 and MPEG-2 both compress them a lot more than ProRes. So if you're going to reuse these clips in an edit, use ProRes. If what you want to do is take a final video and just make an MP4 out of it, then I'd choose that. But otherwise, I'd go ProRes. Then go OK. The next question is, do you want to do the whole video or a trimmed version? Now, it just so happens in my own videos, I've captured the entire tape. That's an hour's worth of tape. And I only want to use a small bit. So I want to use a trimmed version. I want to just use the bit that I'm using on the timeline, not to do the whole thing. But obviously, you've got the option to do the whole thing or just the bit you're using. OK. Where do you want it to turn up? In the bin or on the timeline? Same as before. So I'm going to go timeline. OK. Give it a name. Yep, happy with that. I now want to use that to deinterlace this clip. So like before, right click, choose create, deinterlace, and it's about to go, but it says this thing, save the EDIUS project and try again. Generally, if you're doing stuff off the timeline, you need to save the EDIUS project first, so save it. I mean, you should be doing that anyway. You should get used to saving frequently. Something I always bang on about, save frequently anyway. I have saved it, I can go back, do this again, and wait, and there we are, it's done. So let's pop that onto the timeline, open it up, and there you can see it's a lot better. It's a lot smoother than the other one. Let me just put one over the other, and that's after, before. See all those jaggies all around here, all around these diagonals, and no jaggies. And this is using the quick version. Obviously, if you use the slower versions or one of the others, you might get a better result. It's still high 8, it's still fuzzy. It's not like a big AI fancy upscaling thing. It's basically a deinterlacing filter, and it'll do just the stuff on the timeline. Now, I mentioned that obviously I could have done different things. I could do 50p or I could do 25p. Now, I happen to know that in this batch file here for deinterlacing, this bit here that says YADIF equals will tell you whether you're going to create a 25p or a 50p clip. If I could change that to YADIF equals 1, it's going to make a 50p clip using this thingamabob. Now you might think you can change it here, but no, this just displays it for you. What you've got to do is to actually get to the batch file and edit it using typically Notepad. And it's very simple actually. Right click, edit. So this just shows you it, but if you want to change it, right click, edit. Now I can come in here, find that YADIF equals 0, change it to YADIF equals 1, save it, come back to here, right click on that clip, create, Deinterlace. I mean, it would have been a sensible thing if I changed the name, because obviously it's not doing half frame anymore. But there we are, it's done that. I now have another version, but this time, if I open the properties up, you can see that one's 50p. This original one, 25p. This new one, 50p. It's because I just happen to know what that part of the batch file meant. But that's how easy it is to change the batch files. The hard bit is knowing what to change, but it's dead easy to change them. Right click, edit, type it, save it. Obviously other things you can do by right clicking. If I right click on that, I can delete the batch file. I can reload the whole list. If I do this one and open the folder, it brings up in Windows Explorer where all the batch files are saved. This is the timeline folder. So all these are the different ones that could be in the timeline. This is the bin folder. And you can even, if I go back to the video folder here and go to this thing, this is the one I changed to be 50p. I could actually change the name and it changes it on the timeline. Yeah, this is the essence of the batch server. Basically, you're making a batch file, a text file with some commands in it, and it just takes the stuff from the EDIUS timeline, runs the commands, does whatever it was and puts it in the bin. So what are things? Well, obviously there's loads and loads of things here, but for example, ClipCut. Now ClipCut is already on the timeline, but what's that talking about? Well, it says for a lossless cut video without re-encoding. This doesn't mean it makes Grass Valley lossless video clips. What this means is it will take whatever clip you bunged onto the timeline. So let me sort of take that clip and just trim a little bit out of it. This one here, trim a little bit out of it. I can now take those, lasso both of them, right click, create, cut. Oops, save the project first, David. Then right click, create, cut. And now it goes through and it makes trimmed versions of those clips. And it's not remaking them. It is literally just taking those and chopping off all the extra bits. Now with the DV clip, it's easy. So here we are. This is the DV clip that has been trimmed. Pop that on the timeline. And there you'll notice that it's exactly the same length as the original. This clip, again, take that, pop it onto the timeline. And it's not quite the same length as my original. So that one's exactly the same. This one isn't quite the same. The reason for that is this one is made up of iframes. So that's completely whole frame. So it's very, very easy to chop from one whole frame to another whole frame. This is made up of H.264, which is how it's actually filmed and stored. H.264. It's very, very common. But the thing about H.264 is it's made up of the occasional whole frames and then lots of bits of frames, which is how it's very, very small. But with this cutting thing, it can only cut on the iframes. So it goes to the nearest iframe and chops it, which is why it's not quite the same length as the original. It chops a little bit off. I wish it just went a bit higher, but this is how it works right now. It chops a little bit off. So if you were to take that and use it on anything that's H.264, H.265, MPEG-2, it won't be changing it, but it might not exactly match your clip on the timeline. That's not a problem with Batserver, that's just how this FFmpeg thing works. It works really great on iframe clips like DV, ProRes, Grass Valley HQ and so on. But that's what that cut thing is. Now, obviously there are other ways of trimming clips onto the timeline. I've been through before in various videos about how I use an AAF to take the bits on the timeline and trim it down to just the bits that are being used. I think the downside of using this clip trimming thing is the fact that it won't do it accurately if you're using clips where not everything is a whole frame, and that you can't add extra handles. So yeah, I like to have a clip on the timeline, and if I'm going to trim it down, have a little bit spare just in case I want to twiddle later on. You can't do with that with this. If you want to do things like add handles, I would look at doing an AAF instead. So it's a nice option to have, just bear in mind what it does and what the limitations are. The other thing I would say is that currently with the beta, sometimes it hasn't worked properly with things like MP4 files. And obviously you've got a few other things here, like creating a particular format. I could say, well, let's create an MPEG-4 out of something, use the trim bit and so on, tell it where to go. All that kind of thing's fairly obvious. But this one's quite interesting, combined with an external SRT file. So I do get asked this a lot. Let's do it in the bin. Add external SRT. Right, so I'm going to go up to the bin. I'm going to choose my EDIUS September updates, right click and say create, add external SRT. It's going to say where is the SRT, so I'm going to use the one that EDIUS actually made. Okay, and let it get on with it. Now it's gone ahead and it's made a new file, which has put that subtitle file with the video clip. But you might notice it hasn't put anything in the bin. That's because this creates what's called an MKV file, which is something EDIUS doesn't load up. Actually quite common files for people to save video clips with subtitles and even separate audio tracks. But it's not something that most editing programs load up because it's not really a filming format. It's a way of actually making a final file. And obviously a lot of things don't play it. So you'll find probably a player program on a computer will play it, but if you pop it on a USB pen and stick it into a TV, it probably won't. Now I happen to have VLC on here, which plays it fine. So if I was to take that file, double click and play it, there we are, playing it with the subtitles in here, but I can pop into the menus in here and disable the subtitles or pop back in and turn them back on again, just like it would if it, say, it was a DVD. And that's something that actually people have asked for quite a lot. Why can't you make an MP4 file with subtitles you can turn it on and off? Because you can't with MP4s at the moment. It's a kind of limitation of them. It just doesn't let you. You can burn them in, but then they're there permanently. You can't actually have the subtitles as a separate option that you can turn on and off. That's what you can do with an MKV file. And now, thanks to Batserver, I could actually do that with clips just by adding that as an option. Another interesting thing we've got here is the ability to delete a file. I mean, it deletes it permanently, but you have got the option to delete a file. So if I come in here and go to one of my Deinterlace clips, say I don't want it. In previous versions of EDIUS, you could right click and delete the file. It would only let you do it if the file was in the same folder as the project. Otherwise it would be grayed out. Well, in EDIUS 11, you can't do that at all. There is no option to delete file unless you've added this in. If you add that in, I now have an option to delete the file, so I can do that. It deletes it, file gone. It does say permanently, so let's have a look in the recycle bin. And yep, it's not there. It has gone permanently. So only use that if you really desperately want to delete the file, but that now puts that option back in there, permanently delete files. I don't know if there's a way of getting it to delete stuff and put it into the recycle bin, which is something I quite like to look into. But at the moment, yeah, you can put that in and you can delete files. Just be very, very careful because it permanently deletes the clips. Other quick things to mention about the EDIUS Batserver panel is there is a log. So if things don't work, then you can have a look in here and find out why. And there's an advanced thing with some pretty obvious stuff, but there are things about sort of resetting the whole thing, getting rid of all the bats. Also opening different folders. So I can open all sorts of different things. And it's got some options in here like this, show config of Chorus Hub as a JSON in a notepad. Yeah, it's got things like this, which again, I don't quite understand, but there are some things in there. Mainly I've just been popping things in here, maybe doing a little bit of batch editing with anything I know, and then using it. Another couple of things worth mentioning. When you install the Batserver, there will be a Batserver icon on the desktop. You can cheerfully ignore it. All that does is basically start it off, and you'll see a black window appear and disappear. If it's all working, you don't really need to fiddle with it. It just puts it there. The other thing is there will be updates for the Batserver. The way to find out is basically go down to here and open up the Batserver panel. And here, if there is an update, it will tell you here. So check from time to time just to see if there are any updates. Because obviously it's still beta and there will be some changes as they learn things that happen in the real world when people start properly using it. And it is still beta, so there may be issues with it. Try it out, let us know how you get on with it. And of course, if you know anything about batch files, try writing your own. And if you get any good batch files, why not pop them up onto the EDIUS forum so other people can try them out. But yeah, I think that's a great thing to be added into EDIUS. It can be done because of the Chorus Hub, which is only in EDIUS 11. Anyway, hope you found that useful. If you want to know more about EDIUS or any of my tutorials and so on, visit the website www.dvctraining.co.uk. or give me an email, david@dvctraining.co.uk. But apart from that, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.